So the first thing is the difference between momentary transcendence and the falling away or dissolution. Very, very important and often misunderstood. It's often misunderstood is that the experience of transcending ego or self is the same as the falling away of ego or self. Okay, so the transcending of ego is not the same as the falling away of ego. So, or the transcending of self is not the same as the falling away of self. No self is the falling away of self. It's not a momentary or transient, transcendent experience. It's a permanent cessation. The self dissolves, it falls away. No self is all that's left. So it's very, very, very important to see the difference between that momentary transcending and the permanent cessation of both ego and self. So just transcending ego does not mean that it disappears, right? Imagine in your practice you've transcended ego in different ways. You've tasted that. That's kind of where we start on this exploration of no self is transcending the ego. So I've had the experience of completely transcending ego identity, only to have the egoic mind re-arise to some extent, right? It reconfigures itself. It never does it in the same way or a complete way, but it can reconfigure itself, particularly if a fear arises. The ego, it's the worst terror of the ego is to fall away. It's to the ego. This is terror, right? So the dark night of the soul that is spoken about often is exactly referring to this aspect of ego falling away. So it tends to reconfigure itself in different ways. So it's just important to distinguish. So when I use the word transcendent, you know that it's this momentary transcendence and not a falling away, dissolution, or disappearance. Because, the falling away of ego means that all clinging ceases. All grasping and holding on ceases. That's it. There's the ego has fallen away in that case. So when the ego falls away, all kind of self-concern, self-referential thinking, thoughts disappear. The self can no longer identify with an egoic mind that's ceased. Right? There's no ego there for the self to identify with, to attach to. All the kind of psychological boundaries just drop away. And then this does not mean that no self has arisen. So the ego can fall away. The self is no longer identified with the ego, but the self can identify with something else. This is interesting. What the self can identify with being with the spiritual state, the divine. Self can identify with some other spiritual experience, compassion. I know that may sound contradictory because we do all these practices that align our minds with compassion and loving kindness and so on. But the ego can fall away. The self can actually identify with this, can identify with being a Buddhist. So the self's a kind of slippery character, right? It tends to look for things then to attach to or identify. So I've used the word ego and self. So now I'm going to define it. But I wanted to first start out by the difference between transcendence, and I'll use that word a lot in Falling Away. So ego is a process. It's an act. It's a verb. It's not an entity. And it's the act of self-obsession or concern. And it's all based on grasping and pushing away. Right? It's this friction or struggle with what is. The act of being obsessed with one's own inner concerns. So the ego is kind of the me, right? The me, in the realm of the thoughts and feelings, psychological processes, in the realm of craving and aversion. So an immature ego, if we can use that word, is very entirely concerned with how everything affects me.